The late afternoon light filtered softly through the blinds, casting a warm glow over the room. The air was thick with the scent of old textbooks and freshly brewed coffee. Daniel sat at his desk, surrounded by scattered notebooks, trying to focus on the equations in front of him, but his mind kept drifting. He had always struggled with math, and today was no different, except for one thing. Emma, his stepmother, was sitting beside him, her presence far too close for comfort. She had been helping him with his studies for months now, always patient, always kind. But today, there was something different in the way she leaned over his shoulder, something in her voice that was softer, more playful. Her fingers brushed against his as she adjusted the pages of his notebook, sending a shiver down his spine. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," Emma said, her voice light, almost easing. "You always overthink things, Daniel." He glanced at her, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Well, it's not as easy as you make it sound," he replied, trying to focus on the numbers, but finding it increasingly difficult. There was something about her proximity, something that made his heart race and his thoughts scatter. She tilted her head slightly, a mischievous smile curving her lips. "Oh, I make it sound easy, do I?" she teased, her voice dropping an octave, almost like a whisper. "Maybe you just need someone to guide you through it." Daniel's pulse quickened as her words lingered in the air, charged with an unspoken challenge. He could feel the tension growing between them, like the slow build-up of a storm. He wasn't sure what it was about her, but something in her eyes made him feel exposed, vulnerable, as if she could see right through him. "You think you can do better?" he asked, trying to sound confident, though his voice betrayed him, betraying the slight tremor that had crept in. Emma leaned in closer, her breath warm against his skin. "I always do better," she said, her tone playful but with a hint of something more, something deeper. "But I won't just give you the answer. You'll have to work for it." Her fingers brushed his again as she reached for the notebook, and for a moment, the world outside the room seemed to vanish. The only thing that existed was the heat between them, the subtle tension building with every passing second. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, but he tried to push it down, focusing on the task at hand. "All right," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "I'll try harder." "Good," she said, her eyes glinting with something dangerous, something that made his stomach twist. "I like a challenge." They continued to work, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every word, every glance between them seemed charged with a deeper meaning, a hidden current of something more than just study sessions. Emma's laughter, light and melodic, would occasionally break the silence, but it didn't feel like the laughter of a stepmother helping her stepson. It felt like something else, something more intimate, more tantalizing. After a few more minutes, Emma leaned back in her chair, her fingers brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she glanced at him. "You're doing better," she said softly. "But I think you're still holding back. You need to trust yourself more." "Maybe I trust you too much," Daniel blurted out, before he could stop himself. His words hung in the air, heavy with unintended meaning. Emma's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The room seemed to shrink around them, and Daniel could feel his breath quicken. Emma's lips parted slightly, as if she were about to say something, but instead, she just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a jolt of electricity straight to his core. "Maybe," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But trust can be a dangerous thing, don't you think?" His chest tightened, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. There was something about her, something in the way she looked at him, something in the way she spoke, that made it impossible to think clearly. His mind was clouded with questions he didn't know how to ask, with feelings he wasn't sure he should be having. Emma stood up, moving around the table, her presence still lingering in the air like a palpable force. "You've made progress," she said, her voice lighter now, though there was still that undertone of something more. "I think you've earned a break." "Thanks," Daniel muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was thanking her for the help or for something else entirely. As she moved to the door, she glanced back over her shoulder, her gaze intense, almost unreadable. "I'll leave you to your thoughts," she said, her voice low and suggestive. "But just remember, I'm always here if you need help. With more than just math." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Daniel sitting in stunned silence. His heart was still racing, his thoughts tangled in the web of emotions and tension that had built between them. He didn't know where this was going, But he knew one thing for sure: things had changed. And for the first time, he wasn't sure whether he wanted to stop it or see where it might lead.